Good morning again. Again, I'm Mike Sasso, reporter in the Atlanta Bureau. And what I talked about a little bit earlier is a little bit more conceptual about virtual reality and augmented reality. We're really going to get a little more in the weeds. These fellows all work for companies that actually design these kinds of systems. So in some of the really cool, I've learned a lot. Ben here works for Microsoft and does a lot of holograms, and so we're going to be in just a few minutes we'll see a video of that. So I wanted to introduce here on my immediate right is Kyle Jackson, founder and CEO of Tailspin. To his right is Ash Eldritch, CEO and co-founder of Vital Enterprises. And they're a company that helped the earlier panelist SCM group implement its augmented reality. And finally, Ben Reed is director of mixed reality in the business applications group at Microsoft. We have a divided panel here, half British on this side and half American on this side.
Don't hold this against us, though.
All of them live in the West Coast, so we thank them for making their way here to Atlanta. So let's get started. Kyle, so Tailspin. One of the uses for your augmented reality systems is in helping telecommunications companies. One of the uses, instead of having a zillion technical manuals, they might have to go and repair a piece of fiber optic equipment or something. You can actually beam those manuals into their headsets and have it right before their very eyes. Take us through a little bit. Just take us through a little bit about how you go about equipping them, how you set up the software for that, and just in layman's terms how that works.
Sure. So it's probably no surprise we're very visual creatures, so it's a lot more effective to do everything from service to learning to collaborating with others, with much more visual tools. And one of the benefits of everything that we're working on is it's the set of tools is for the first time kind of bringing 3D and spatial awareness into that equation. So, in the telecommunications use case, they have a huge number of employees that are out in the field working on really complex devices, and that are constantly changing, right? And so, historically, they're given very little on the visual aid front to actually perform that job, and so the site installs take days instead of hours. There's a lot of lag and just missing information between headquarters and turn up and knowledge on the front end. So, building augmented and virtual reality tools, both on the training side and then on the field support side, basically brings them a visual aid right to the point of impact. And that's something that when we surveyed users was exceptionally high in the need. I mean, basically everybody was over 90% of the couple hundred technicians that we surveyed on the first tools we rolled out, ages from literally 28 to 58, all said, yeah, this is something that we absolutely need. So it seems like that we're just rolling out the first programs now. Based on more fiber and 5G use cases, so really complex infrastructure's got to go in, and we'll see. Well, I think testing has really shown that on the learning side, it's something that's really effective. Now it's a question of how much more effective can it make the actual installation.
And you have an application for not specifically manufacturing, but insurance adjusters and whatnot, where they can potentially get trained in valuing flood or fire damage. Take us through what you've been doing with that.
Yeah, our general focus has been really large distributed workforces, because that seems to be an area where knowledge falls off, and these mediums can really make a significant impact there. So insurance, telecommunication, transportation, real estate. These are all places where you've got hundreds of thousands of people working without the information they need, and oftentimes in situations they've never encountered before. So that sets a company up to fail, and puts a lot of liability on each of those customers or each of those locations. So in the insurance use case, we had it was something that somebody said to us that I thought just really stuck was, we meet our customers on the worst day of their life. And so obviously when you do that 5 times a day, you need to bring both soft skills and be a collaborator in terms of the solution that you create. And so it's really kind of like, I think, one of the most challenging places in terms of the skills that people need to be successful going forward, as well as just the amount of knowledge they need to retain and the amount of complexity that they encounter. And so we built an immersive solution where people are able to go in and basically try those situations over and over and over, learn to fail before they actually get to that situation. So we've found that it's again kind of a multiplier effect on effectiveness for learning. So we're seeing people go from weeks to days to learn complex processes and material science and all the things that go into doing that job well. And so when you start thinking about the impact that could have on how you think about the labor market and how you think about some of the skills gaps, problems, and stuff that people have spoke about, it completely shifts the conversation, because now you're not worrying about 12 weeks of onboarding. You're worrying about a few days. So you can deal with regional talent when there's catastrophic issues. You can parachute in and get people skilled up relatively quickly, and you can actually test and measure in these environments who's really a superstar, which is another benefit of these kinds of applications. So we found it both from the immersive and virtual reality end all the way through what Ash is doing and with SCM and others on the field support end, that these are tools that just become a multiplier effect of our potential.
Okay. Ash, I want to move to you with Vital Enterprises, and I believe we have a video of something really cool that Ash's system, if we could get that up there.
Oh yeah, so this is about a 40-second video, just to demonstrate a couple of things that we do. So here you're seeing heads up work instructions. So this person is working through basically a simple checklist using voice commands so that they can kind of control navigate through their instructions. Very, very straightforward and keeps the hands free. And then here we have remote assistance, where there you have someone who is an expert guiding someone in the field who is performing a task for the first time. By being able to see exactly what they're seeing and being able to kind of draw on what they're seeing, they can provide a kind of very intuitive way to convey how to perform that task. So we're seeing kind of a really dramatic improvement in the ability to provide customer service, as well as to support your own field technicians. Using that technology.
And I think earlier we had somebody from SCM was saying that these headsets, these augmented reality headsets, cost around $3,000 a piece, right? How is that? And they can. I think you had said they could run as much as $5,000 a piece. How is that affecting their adoption? Is it a little too expensive, or in what cases does it make sense at this moment? And what is it likely to be a year or 2 or 5 years from now? And is it better off just to wait to get into this until the prices come down?
Right. I mean, it's definitely been a challenge for sure. I mean, the price can range anywhere from $1,500 to $5,000. Yeah. I mean, and if you look at it, 10 years ago, it would have been 5 times that much. And I think it's very much about the state of the technology, the state of the industry, where the first kind of truly mobile cell phone was $4,000, right? And it was absolutely enormous. So it's a progression that the technology is being iterated on, and it's improving constantly, and also the price is coming down. So you see Moore's law in action there. But I think really the question is not to look at the cost of implementation in isolation of the business benefit and the return on investment. So what we always do is if you go in and you want to implement something, you're going to put 50 glasses on the floor, and you're going to put 50 glasses in with your field service team, and then you add onto that, the cost of like bespoke content creation, custom integrations with your product lifecycle management systems or your ERP systems. Then yes, the cost starts to appear to be onerous, and so that can create kind of a barrier to entry, definitely, for folks, because you haven't yet proven the business value. And so what we always do when we go into a company is we say, first of all, don't deploy 100 devices, deploy 5. And find a really good, simple use case. Start with something like the virtual presence that you saw there, telepresence, where it's basically plug and pay. There's no custom content creation. There's no integrations necessary. It just works out of the box. So you can go in, you can run a pilot, measure everything, demonstrate there's a business value, and once you can show that you're going to get a $10 back on every dollar you spend, that's when you start to scale it out.
Kyle, I think you had said in an earlier conversation that if you are in your insurance adjuster case, that there has to be a certain level of value, like that adjuster has to be making decisions of $10,000 or above, or something to that extent. There's some level at which threshold. Take us through it. Is that an actual real world $10,000?
I think it was 2 years ago when we started this. Started with that particular use case. What we learned over the last several years is there's a lot of value provided by these mediums that is actually not directly related to some of the more traditional metrics, because it does send kind of a different message for the kind of organization you're going to build going forward, and what role technology is going to play inside that, and how you and your colleagues are going to become collaborators in a way that it becomes kind of inspiring. So we ended up creating a value creation framework. There was actually, there was as much the hard, tangible ROI factors as there was the soft, like, what does it mean to the workforce? Is this going to have an effect on our churn? Is this going to empower the retiree community to come back in and actually provide, expert assistance? Those are things that are like, how do you even quantify that today? Because it's not been a factor you can even look at. So I think the metrics that we've seen are, like what Ash said, start small, but start focused. And what we've consistently seen now is we prove the value to be so exponential that then it becomes a conversation, which is actually, to be honest, becomes quite overwhelming for small companies. But it's how do we do this? How do we use this to transform our whole business? And then you're in a different conversation, because now you're looking at every single thing in insurance or every single thing in telecommunications, and those use cases, there's hundreds. And so now it becomes a different kind of conversation. But we've seen that we make that leap in the first 12 months of engagement, where it's like, let's build something, let's try it, let's roll it out, and then we get from there to, oh wow, it worked. Here's the measured effectiveness based on the metrics that we were able to track, and then we come in with here's the things you didn't really know how to track, but here's what we observed, and then we look at those two things together. It becomes a totally different conversation. So, and the people who are early adopters, I think they're now in that phase of conversation, which is really great, because it's a totally different conversation than 2 years ago. But the people who are just starting, I think they're going to find the same thing.
And on the point of cost, it seems like from talking to you fellows, there's a real fluidity in how to charge for these. There's a lot, the company early, SCM Group, they experimented with like an annual fee. You pay them $4,200 or so per year for one of these units, and in the assistants and the virtual assistants. Then you can also rent it. There's that model. There's even like a pay-per-play or pay-per-use model. It seems like people aren't exactly sure how they should be charging for this. Why is that true? What are, and feel free to open anyone to answer this.
Ben has the most insight.
I would say that it really just comes down to choice. In the same way that, anyone who came to this room today used a variety of different means of transport. Some people drove, some people took a taxi, some people did a ride share, somebody maybe walked, maybe used public transport. And ultimately, you got to use the method of transport that made sense to you and your needs. I think the same is true for these technologies. On the subject of cost, one of our customers recently shared with us just saving the travel costs alone for one support call more than justified the cost of the hardware. So I think from a use case standpoint and justifying things as well as choice, I think that's common for other things as well.
Yeah, I think the value is so high that it's actually a metric that's deceiving to even look at. We were told by one of our telecommunications company customers that it costs them $500 to roll a truck. So if they have to go back to a site, it's paid for the hardware. So you have to look at some of those other factors. But But yeah, it's a bit of a menu of ways to engage at this point, just because I don't think it's near as mature as other SaaS or other software industries yet. So it just needs some more time.
Okay. That dovetails, Ben, kind of moves on to you conveniently. We're going to take a video and show something really cool, and he's going to walk us through what's happening. Microsoft's Hololens, which uses holograms.
So here you can actually see a technician who is laying out a manufacturing space in an immersive experience. Microsoft actually has devices that we work with through our hardware partners that are at the immersive end of the mixed reality spectrum, but we also have our own first-party hardware that you may have heard of that's Microsoft HoloLens. But in this case, the technician lays the manufacturing floor out with the various pieces of machinery in that immersive space, but then when they're able to get on site, they can make adjustments, because for those of you who are working in this industry, you'll know that oftentimes the as-built or the current situation in a room or a facility is very different, or could have things on it that aren't in the actual plans. And so here he's able to make that adjustment and do that digitally with those holograms, thereby saving time and money, because he didn't have to try and do that with that piece of equipment that cost hundreds of thousands of dollars at the time that it was actually physically there.
Yeah, and that leads us, we were having a discussion up in the green room of what a hologram is, and we were talking about Star Trek, and to me, to a layman, it seemed like that image of that person appearing out of the blue seemed like it was in the distance, and it was some kind of physical being or representation off in the distance. He was telling me that that's actually a hologram in many cases. It really just only exists in your retina. And so tell us what is a hologram, at least by Microsoft's definition.
That's much louder. Okay, so what I would say would be, as it relates to mixed reality, we've heard AR, VR, we've heard other terms thrown around in this room. We, Microsoft, take the position that everything on the spectrum between the physical and the digital is all mixed reality, and it doesn't really matter where you are. It all just comes down to, on that spectrum that is, comes down to the use case and the specifics of the wearer or what they want to do that makes sense, whether that's they want to have a fully immersive experience where they're blocked off from the real world, or they want to have an experience where, like we are right now, we can see the real world, but for some reason we want to have it blended with digital objects or digital representations of objects or people or digital environments. It's those things that are the holograms that were referenced just now. And you can go to the definition of the word hologram back to the Greek holo meaning whole and gram meaning drawing if you want. I know that there's some people in the room who are probably thinking there's a 1940s definition of a hologram which involves lasers. But if you think about it, things like photographs and the definition of that have changed. So I think the same is probably true for holograms. The thing that makes it so exciting for me, though, in this space is that what we're really doing and what we're really talking about here and in this panel, but also some of the other panels, is what we're doing is we're unlocking the thing that is unique to each of us as human beings. We are, and some of you in the room I haven't met before, but I know everyone in this room and anyone watching online has one thing in common, at least one thing, and that is that we're all experts in the three-dimensional world. We navigate it every single day. We put on clothes, we get ourselves out of the house and we go to work, those types of things. That's because we're experts in the 3D world. And so by unlocking that human potential and giving it that to people to do, essentially we're empowering them to do more. And that's why I'm so excited to work in the space.
Your video showed a gentleman kind of taking holographic images and placing them, like factory equipment and kind of laying out a factory floor. Take us through, just without getting too in the weeds, I mean, how do you capture those images and input them into this headset, and just a real quick understanding of how that works?
Well, in that particular instance, the equipment was most likely designed in some CAD software, and so that three-dimensional model existed. We have an import tool that we recently launched along with the Microsoft Dynamics 365 layout experience or app that you saw there, as well as the remote assistance app that enables you to easily take those 3D models, because the models that you would use for CAD have to have much finer precision on them than perhaps you would for the purposes of positioning them in a room based on things like manufacturing tolerances. But a lot of those models already exist. Like the model for this building will exist somewhere because that's how it was built and designed. The model for all of those 3D assets, the actual physical machines also exist. So bringing them in is relatively simple.
There's just to add to that, there's for everything that doesn't exist already in 3D, the capture process is becoming it's dropping very quickly, and really the use case depends on one of the factors is do you actually need the geometry of what you're capturing as a site. And if you do, then there's volumetric capture tools that are out there now that do that and import into these other systems relatively inexpensively already. If you don't even need that, there's consumer-grade 360 cameras that you could go out and put on a site and capture enough to be able to have a very collaborative dialogue with the customer or with your colleagues around, hey, here's what we're up against. And so there's a range of real-world capture tools already, too, that are not a limiting factor here.
Yeah, we actually have several mixed reality capture studios that do not 360-degree capture looking out, like you were describing, but essentially 360-degree capture looking in, so you can capture both people and objects in 360 for the use in this case, too.
One of the things I wanted to ask earlier in an earlier panel, we had an academic, a fellow from Emory University here in Atlanta, who does some really interesting stuff of visualization and augmented reality and stuff. And we were talking about, your gentleman in your video was moving things around in space and using his hand gestures. And I was asking him, he did say that, some people might be a little bit shy about it, might be a little awkward making strange hand gestures. Is that holding this back at all? I mean, what do you find?
It's interesting as you asked me that question, because I noticed that you're very naturally using hand gestures as you talk to me. And so I guess that's the point. We as humans are already very comfortable, and it is very natural for us to use hand gestures. But ultimately, there's choice here. If you want to use a hand gesture, you can use a hand gesture. If you want to use a voice command, you can use a voice command. If you want to use another input method that you're familiar with, whether that's a keyboard or a mouse or some kind of clicker, you can do that. These are, Hololens is a computer that runs Windows, so you can connect, all manner of peripherals to it. But it really comes down to what you want to use for the use case. Maybe you can't use your hands because I was talking with a gentleman over here earlier who was talking about people who are using giant wrenches that require them to use both hands and put their entire body weight behind it. That person's probably not going to be, using a hand gesture at the same time or picking up a keyboard or a mouse. So they might use their voice, for example. But it really comes down to the circumstance and preference and choice.
Ash, I wanted to ask you, I think one of our chats, we were talking about labor, and I write a bit about the labor force and how technology is changing jobs and whether jobs are at risk here. And one of my questions to you the other day was, if I can have maybe a lower level technician without phenomenal skill on a factory floor and somebody in Milan, like the gentleman earlier today, telling him, visually, looking at what's happening actually in real time, and telling him, move that lever, use that wrench. Does that mean I don't need, that much skill on the line anymore? Is this whole thing a play to reduce costs amongst technicians? Just talk about the implication on the job market and the skills.
Sure, absolutely. I mean, that's a common fear when you introduce a new technology is it going to replace a lot of jobs? And I think the previous panel actually addressed this really, really well, which was, there's what we're seeing is a significant lack of available skills in manufacturing. And I think this has been a trend that's been going on for 10, 15 years. increasing automation, the fact that the work is generally getting more complex, and other factors mean that there's the difference between the number of jobs being opened and the number of jobs being hired for is continuing to increase. It's quite dramatic, and I think that this is a technology that is enabling people to elevate their own level at which they can operate. So we're not actually going in and replacing jobs with machines. What we're doing instead is bringing things like artificial intelligence and other and spatial computing capabilities and actually giving that to the worker. So rather than relying on paper-based processes and kind of manual and in-person processes and guesswork, you can actually have someone basically gain the benefits of these human-centric tools, being given tacit knowledge on the job, and so really elevating them to the point where they can perform a higher skilled job more efficiently. So I don't think there's any fear that this is actually going to replace any jobs. It's simply going to allow people to perform more sophisticated jobs more efficiently. So I think it's actually a very powerful tool for addressing that skill gap that we're seeing.
But 5 years from now, would you, or 10 years, or however long in the future, would you expect companies' technician costs to be reduced because of this?
I think that the cost benefit you're going to see, it comes primarily from two things. It's going to come from an improvement in the level of efficiency that people are working at, and it's an improvement in the level of quality, so reducing the need for rework, for example. People who, I think some statistics were cited earlier, you get a dramatic improvement, I think it was Boeing, you get a dramatic improvement in efficiency, right? But they didn't have, it was actually a production bottleneck. So they can actually get more people on the line, moving faster, and that's where you see the benefit. It's not going to come down to a reduction in human capital cost.
Do you gentlemen agree with that?
I can share one example from one of our customers who's in the energy industry. They have a lot of remote sites, and one of the challenges they have is that their experts don't want to be deployed in the field anymore because they're getting more senior in their career. They'd like to be with their families. And so these technologies are actually helping with employee satisfaction and retention because they're enabling those experts to essentially work whenever, wherever, and not have to be deployed in remote locations. So it has a positive impact on both retention and satisfaction for the employee.
Yeah, I would agree 100% with that. And I also think there's another component here when you really think about how fast the world moves, which is, not everybody is naturally gifted in kind of becoming a continuous learner. And so in order to keep up or to move, cross-train or fill a gap, there's always gaps. Things are moving so fast. So it's actually more about how do these technologies allow the workforce to become more agile versus the old model, which is I'm a telco technician for the better part of 20 or 30 years on certain lines or certain boxes. And so I think it actually affords a new kind of flexibility that also is attractive to people, to where I can be passionate about one thing for 2 years, but that doesn't mean I have to leave the company to go and be passionate about something else. And so those things are the things I think really are interesting because either I can be supported in the field and I can be an entry worker and try and learn there, or I can actually simulate and kind of self-select myself in or out of a thing because I actually get the experience before I even go in and do it. That provides for some really interesting kind of new ways to think about employment, internally. And so,
let me ask one last question as we end things. Put on your prognosticator's hat, and I don't get the sense. I get the sense that companies are just experimenting with a lot of these technologies. When do we see, augmented reality and mixed reality show up in big companies? When does it filter down to medium-sized companies? And when do two-person insurance brokerages or something start using these kinds of things? I'd be happy
to. I can tell you that from Microsoft's perspective, the HoloLens device has been on the market for over 2 years now. And we have many customers across a whole range of vertical industries already taking advantage of and benefiting from mixed reality technology. It's not because it's cool or new or it's a fad. They're doing it because it's doing one or more of the following three things. It's saving them time, it's saving them money, or it's enabling them to do something that couldn't previously do.
I think when we started Vital about 6 years ago, it was still very, very large companies that had the capital and the resources to be able to kind of experiment in this space. And then, there are some outliers like Boeing, for example, has been working with this technology for decades, actually, advancing the state of the art, proving out some of the value there. But I think what we're going to see over the next few years is the commoditization to some extent of content creation tools, the hardware, and then companies like myself and Kyle who are kind of bringing the toolkits to you ready-made in a way so that you can kind of simply pick it up and run with it. So we're looking at ways, for example, things like being able to provide both the hardware and the software as a subscription service, right, where we can bring down the cost. We're really starting to look at not just those very large corporations with large resources, but medium-sized and even small companies where they want to get started, but there's the barrier to entry there is the cost and the resources you have to put into getting started. So I think we're getting very close to the point where you can simply click a couple of buttons and deploy this technology.
Okay, and Kyle, real quick, I'm being told we have to shuffle off, but your quick guess.
I think 2020. I think we're in short. Next year is going to be really impactful. There's a couple new generations of devices that are going to bring the cost down and get rid of some of the complications today. And the generation after that is going to basically be more or less, I think, consumer ready.
Okay. Thanks for your time.
Thank you.